I'm Hugh Hewitt. If you were watching after the debate, I said the winners of the debate, in my view, were Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, and Governor Christie, who joins me now. Good morning, Governor. How are you?
Doing well, Hugh. How are you?
Good. I want to begin because you're fair. Even though you're relentless in your criticism of the former president, you are fair in the assessment of the charges brought against him. New York State Supreme Court Judge Arthur Engoron valued Mar-a-Lago at between $18 and $28 million. Forbes had it at $325 million last year. I don't know what it's worth, but I can use Zillow. Are they trying to screw him in that case?
Look, I think it's kind of crazy to say it's worth only between 18 and 28 million, given what I know others have paid for properties in Palm Beach that are significantly lesser properties. Now, the problem is that it's a commercial property. It's really not a residential property, and that was Trump's doing. He turned it into a commercial property. So you have expenses that go along with it that are much different than a typical residential property. Now he wants to call it a typical residential property for purposes of this. So it is not as valuable because it's now commercial, and you have employees that you need and all the rest to run it rather than just a private home. And he did it because he couldn't afford it at the time, but he wanted to act like he could afford it. So do I think it's worth more than 18 to 28 million? I do. But do I think it's worth 325 million? I do not.
No, I want to broaden out the lens. The impression is going, not just because of the Trump cases in Manhattan and Georgia, but because of the prosecution of the parent in Loudoun County, because of the prosecution of pro-life protesters, that there are two justice systems. So let's move off of the Donald Trump focus for a moment. Do you think that that impression is growing in the United States, and how would you combat it if you were president?
I think it is growing in the United States, unfortunately. I think that what's going on with Hunter Biden, and if they continues to be as aggressive as they appeared to do when they changed their position on the gun charges and brought those against him, the Bob Menendez prosecution is certainly an aggressive one against one of the most prominent Democrats in the country. So I think that's making it better. But in the end, what I would do is appoint an attorney general who, even Democrats would agree was someone who was fair. And I would instruct the attorney general the thing that I was instructed by John Ashcroft when I became a U.S. attorney, that your job every day is to do justice without fear, favor, or partisanship. And that was the standard you're going to be held to. And if you didn't meet that standard, you would be terminated. That's what John Ashcroft told me when I became U.S. attorney. I think that's the way we did it in the Bush administration. And I don't think you had that sense in the Bush administration. This really began in the Obama administration when Eric Holder, Barack Obama's wingman, became the attorney general and acted like he was Obama's wingman. I don't think Trump did much to change it, although I think Bill Barr was a good choice, but Jeff Sessions was a disaster. And Merrick Garland has not looked good either. So it's who you pick as attorney general, and you need the president to stay the hell out of it, because once the president gets involved, it's de facto political.
At the debate on Wednesday night, the one area that I thought was actually worth listening to, I would have spent more time on, is the rise of crime in our nation's cities and our suburbs and our counties. I think you made that point. And DAs that will not prosecute. And the answers are, Governor DeSantis said he shut him down. He did. But what can a president do? They could ask for writers cutting off money to people that have non-prosecution rates. What should a president do about this? Because those are not federal issues. They're mostly state issues. I heard what you said about justice, but justice isn't big enough to cover even San Francisco and Philly's crime rates, Governor.
Look, what you do, Hugh, is you make justice big enough to do it. You can't, at this point, a president is not going to be able to do what Governor DeSantis did in Florida, which was fire people who he thought was not prosecuting things. And to give that as his answer was sophomoric, because he can't do that. And he wants to talk about his Florida record, and that's fine. He should be able to take credit for the things that he did well in Florida, as long as he's willing to take blame for the things that he did poorly. But in the end, it's not a plan. The plan is to say, we're going to switch our focus. There are plenty of employees and prosecutors at DOJ to be able to do this. It's going to mean you don't do other things as much. You don't do as much on the white-collar side as you did before. But job one is to get violent crime and crimes that affect quality of life in our cities under control. It's about picking priorities. The president has to set policy priorities. And mine would be getting violent crime in our cities and suburbs under control. And if that meant there were some other things we had to let go for the time being, so be it, until we get these people under control.
All right, let me move on to foreign affairs, Governor, because it didn't come up much. Former President Trump did order the killing of al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader who decimated ISIS. He did order taking out Soleimani when he arrived in Iraq to attack American troops. He did move the Israeli embassy. He did sign the Abraham Accords. He had a pretty good record on him, many things. Why would you be a better commander-in-chief than Donald Trump was?
Because I wouldn't coddle Vladimir Putin, because I wouldn't coddle Kim Jong-un, because I wouldn't coddle President Xi and say he was someone we could trust to control COVID. I wouldn't say that, Vladimir Putin or treat him like he was brilliant and a great leader. I wouldn't look at every autocrat in the world and say they were good, because that's what I wanted to be. And that's the problem with Donald Trump. In fact, is he paid no attention to Central or South America. He paid no attention to our relationships in Europe. This is something that has now come back to bite us in Ukraine. It's come back to bite us because where we don't pay attention to these problems and leave a vacuum, they're filled by the autocrats that he thinks are so wonderful. Words matter out of a United States president's mouth. And those words coming out of Donald Trump's mouth are absolutely awful and destructive, because he loves Vladimir Putin, he loves President Xi, and he loves Kim Jong-un. And the only reason he does, Hugh, is because, one, he wishes he was an autocrat, and two, they kissed his rear end. And if you do that, then Donald Trump thinks you're great.
All right, let me turn to Tommy Tuberville. I've asked on this program the former president, Ron DeSantis, and Tim Scott about the Tuberville holds. They support them. Nikki Haley does not support them. What does Chris Christie think about the Tuberville holds on the military promotions?
Well, it slips your mind. You asked me the last time I was on. I said I'm against the Tuberville holds. I think they're destructive to our morale in the military and our ability to execute. And both are bad because we're going to lose people because of it. Good people who help to lead our military and make it as great as it is. I think Senator Tuberville is wrong for doing it. I sympathize with his concern about the abortion issue. But on the other hand, Hugh, this is not the way to get it done. And I said that the last time I was on the show, and I will repeat it again.
Governor, I got a question about abortion. It's been asked in the first two debates. All right, it's been asked and answered. There are some differences about hypotheticals which are not on the table. Dobbs is on the table. Everyone agrees Dobbs was well decided. Do we need any more abortion questions in the debates?
Look, I think I've been very clear on my answer, and I think everyone else on the stage has been clear on theirs. And I don't think so, but I suspect in debate 3 in Miami we'll get another one. Yet we did not get a question on President Trump saying that, General Milley should be executed for treason.
I'm going to come to that. I want to know about Vivek and the Chinese money. The Gatling gun that you bring to these things did not get turned on Vivek. I don't know if you think that's because the air's out of that already or if because Tim Scott had done it, but I had not heard about Vivek taking out bags of money of Beijing. Do you know anything about that?
I do, and I was going to say it, and Tim did it first. And quite frankly, I didn't think it was worth going back over again. I can tell you this. Vivek knows he was wrong. I could tell by the way he reacted. He didn't have a good excuse. I thought Nikki didn't do anyone any good by, screaming over his answer. Look, I think the way the debate was conducted between Nikki, Tim, and Vivek really just lessened the debate, quite frankly. I don't really care what drapes Nikki had in the UN ambassador's residence in New York City. I don't care whether she was really for a 10-cent gas tax increase or just kind of for it, or she got something in trade for it. These are not things that are going to make America a better place and deal with our problems in Washington, D.C. And so I think the Vivek issue with China is significant because it shows Vivek's hypocrisy. But Tim took that on first. I don't think he delivered it very effectively. And as a result, I think he took the air out of it for this debate, but I think there'll be a lot of more discussion about it between now and Miami in November.
You know, I do not believe, I don't know who's going to make it. I don't know what their standards would be. If I had a standard, I would have 20% national or 10% in either Iowa or New Hampshire. That would qualify you, rounding up. You're at 9.8 in the Real Clear Politics. Nikki Haley, Governor DeSantis, and Donald Trump. And I really only think the four of you have a path. But I don't make the rules. I just watch them. Let me ask what was not asked. What would you do to bring down the cost of food and gas immediately? Because that's what's killing Americans, Governor Christie.
It is. Look, I think that if you show right off the bat that you have a way of reducing federal spending, and I think that, I would show that very early on, that would encourage the Fed to lower interest rates much more quickly than they will otherwise, and that will lead to less costs in the two items you talked about. Secondly, you have to also show the energy industry that you are going to expand the production of oil and natural gas. And for me, I would also show a pathway to expanding nuclear in a significant way. If you show that you're going to expand those three areas of energy, it will affect long-term energy costs on the market, and that will bring down gasoline prices as well. I think those are the two most concrete ways you can do it very quickly.
Now, Governor, I asked about Ohio-class submarines 8 years ago, and everyone got smart about it. Is it an ambush question to ask candidates about hypersonic missiles and how we've got to reallocate between our armed forces the basic defense budget? Because we got to get more in the Navy and more out of the Army and more into space and less into airplanes that can get shot down. Is that a gotcha to ask about hypersonics?
Well, I mean, look, Hugh, a little bit of one because it is a very detailed question, and if you haven't spent time, like I have in terms of looking at the allocation in the military in that kind of detail, to ask that on the debate stage is I think, a little bit of a tough question. But look, now that you're previewing it for everybody between now and November 8th, people should be ready for it. And look, I've said all along that where I would look to spend military on this is threefold. One, in terms of reallocation of the current amount. One is to make sure that every military family, has the money to be able to support themselves, that we don't have military members on food stamps. Second would be the Navy, and both in terms of our submarines and our ships. And third, from my perspective, would be making sure that our nuclear capability on all three legs of the triad were modernized to make sure that they were the most effective deterrent that they could be.
Last question, Governor. Why would you win more states, more votes than Donald Trump, either against Joe Biden or against who I think will be their nominee, Gavin Newsom?
Hugh, because I've done it, and he hasn't. He eked out a win in 2016 against the worst presidential candidate in my lifetime, Hillary Clinton. I'm the only person on that stage, including Donald Trump, who's defeated a Democratic incumbent, and I did it in one of the bluest states in America. And I did it by winning, 70% of independents for my reelection, 62% of independents in my first election. I did it by winning 51% of Latinos in my reelection. I know how to do this because I've done it look, if New Jersey is not the toughest place in America for a Republican to win, we haven't elected a Republican to the United States Senate in 50 years, then we're one of the two or three toughest places to win. I know how to do this because I've done it. No one else on that stage has either been elected in a blue state or governed, more importantly, in a blue state. That's what Ronald Reagan brought to the table in 1980, and he won 44 states and then governed in the most effective way that any president has governed in the last 40 years, in my opinion. I would do exactly the same thing.
Last question, Governor, because I got 1 minute left. Will you show a little egg on who will be your vice president in your cabinet? Because Americans elect administrations, and it would be useful to know what sort of people the various Republican candidates would bring along with them.
I think I will do that, but I'm going to do it much closer to the first elections in Iowa and New Hampshire, Hugh, because I think to do it beforehand, before it narrows a little bit more, smacks of the kind of arrogance that people would be, I think, a little bit turned off by. But as we get closer to it, and I think the field narrows more, and it becomes more realistic that me or Nikki or Rod or Donald Trump are more likely than not to be the nominee, then I think you need to know more about the kind of people we would have around us.
Governor Chris Christie, always great to talk to you. Congratulations on a pretty good show on Wednesday night. I look forward to the next one. I think it's in November. I think it's in Miami, but we don't know yet any official details from the RNC. Thank you, Chris Christie. Stay tuned, America.